Some states in this country trust teachers with guns, but not books. Sadly, many of the states that want to arm teachers with dangerous firearms are prohibiting teachers from using or distributing books to students that focus on sexuality and racial identity. Efforts to regulate and control what students read date back decades, but recent efforts to ban books from classrooms have taken on a life of their own, often resulting in contentious and violent school board meetings and even death threats aimed at teachers and librarians. What's driving this intense and increased efforts to ban books and regulate what students read? And most importantly, what impact are these bans or efforts to ban books having on our students, our schools, and communities? Experts weigh in, all coming up next.
Live from Los Angeles, this is the Special Report with Areva Martin.
Parents, activists, school board officials, and lawmakers around the country are challenging books at a pace not seen in decades. Conservative groups in particular, often fueled by social media, are now pushing the challenges into state houses, law enforcement, and political races. According to a recent report by Penn, between January and September of 2021, 24 legislatures across the country introduced 54 separate bills intended to restrict teaching and training in K through 12 schools, public universities, and even workplace settings. These bills are intended to legislate the ideals and determine what concepts are considered acceptable and those which are considered out of bounds. Among the most frequent targets are books about race, gender, and sexuality, like George Johnson's All Boys Aren't Blue, and Jonathan Evason's Lawn Boy, and even Toni Morrison's The Bluest Eye. Banning these books and other like titles are a threat to the U.S. education system, and these bans, as we know, have a chilling effect on critically important discourse on racism and sexism. My first guest knows a lot about these book bans and spends a great part of his career doing research and advocacy around freedom of expression. His name is Jonathan Friedman. He is the director of PEN America, a nonprofit that works to protect free expression in the U.S. and across the globe. Good morning, Jonathan, and welcome.
Good morning.
So, Jonathan, PEN America issued this report called Educational Gag Order, where you actually identified the states across the country that have tried to or have introduced some form of legislation aimed at banning books. What prompted the organization to do this report, and tell us the most egregious findings coming out of this report?
Well, we've seen a creeping effort spreading over the past year and a half to introduce different kinds of bills in numerous states, which would, as you said, prohibit or constrain how teachers talk about a wide variety of topics. Most often, these bills include a long list of quote unquote divisive concepts that teachers are not allowed to talk about. But what exactly is even being banned in many cases is quite vague. So the bills don't exactly say, what it is you can or cannot say. They say that you cannot talk about certain concepts, or would punish teachers for talking about concepts that might make some students in the class feel guilty about some aspect of American history. And that's an impossible situation in which for teachers to do their work, where we would hope that school classrooms are places where students can ask questions, and different and interesting channels of conversation are able to arise. And so in a few cases, in some bills, those vague kind of concepts that are banned are coupled with specific prohibitions on curricular materials, including in some cases the curriculum associated with the 1619 project, but it's a tremendously fluid moment. So all kinds of bills now are borrowing and from one another. They're mimicking each other. They've proposed all kinds of ideas to be banned in school classrooms. And none of this is good for democracy. None of it is good for schools. You asked about egregious examples. There are some cases where they are trying to control how it is that teachers might talk about slavery. So for example, saying that it would be illegal to teach that the United States had slavery later than other countries, or that slavery involved one race enslaving another, which is pretty core to the American historical record on slavery. And so these are bills that are against truth, they are against fact finding, and they are very worrying because it is these bills that are themselves a form of propaganda, essentially trying to control how it is all teachers in the country are able to talk to students about these issues.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that there's an effort to ban books that talk about slavery and tell what slavery really was and how slavery operated in this country. So we know that there are novels that a lot of these bills are targeting, but what about like the classroom books, your basic history book that has, talks about slavery? Are they going, some of these states actually ripping, textbooks away from classrooms? Are they rewriting textbooks? How are they handling your average 8th grade American history book that's going to talk about white slave owners and Black slaves being brought over from Africa?
Right, or even slaves being owned by the founders of the country. These are historical facts, and they are all in danger. And the state that's gone the farthest here is now Florida. Florida had a number of math textbooks this year that it suggested contained quote unquote critical race theory with very thin evidence, and raising a lot of questions about who had even reviewed these textbooks, made those determinations, or suggested that those textbooks should be prohibited. Now there are new guidelines emerging from the Florida Department of Education that suggest they're going to ban any conversation about social justice in social studies textbooks, and or efforts to make society more equal for those groups that had historically been disadvantaged. That would be something that becomes prohibited. And what exactly does that mean? How does a vague notion like that, a set of terms in a social studies guideline, get translated into specific prohibitions on textbooks? We have yet to see what's going to happen, but it's very clear with what the Florida DOE did with math textbooks that they're not afraid of telling publishers who might just be telling factual accounts of history that they need to change what they've written in order to be acceptable in Florida. And so it's been coming slowly with the introduction of bills that prohibited how teachers talk about things, and this grassroots movement that we've seen in a lot of parts of the country to remove specific books from school libraries, but is now all sort of merging into this one moment where suddenly, indeed, as you say, they're going to be coming after textbooks. They might indeed next move against curriculum. And all of this is so alarming because it's not being driven by educators, experts, in some cases by parents who want the history of the country taught differently. This is a small minority who are taking advantage of a political moment and basically trying to politicize all of what we teach in schools. We've seen challenges to how we teach about sex education or even anatomy in some school districts, and that stands to only continue to get worse as more such challenges appear.
So you said a lot. I want to break some of it down. Let's go back to those math books. What was in these math books? Because when that story broke, we started to hear that Florida Department of Education was trying to ban certain math books because, as you said, they claimed that the math books were teaching critical race theory. And we know critical race theory has now become this catch-all phrase for any topic that addresses race and racism in this country. What was in the math book?
Yeah, they've only released, I think, 4 examples of charts that touch on issues related to racism and racial bias. And I think that there are like serious questions people might ask about how is this being taught in classrooms? Does it, belong? But I think what you have to realize, and what most people are failing to realize, is that most such examples come from fairly advanced textbooks, like for 11th or 12th grades. They are elective courses, and there are materials in textbooks that a lot of times teachers asked to put there so that, for example, if you are trying to make math relevant to the moment, to a current kind of a historical moment or political moment in the country, that you might have an example. You might, rather than having to look online and find an example of a chart that talks about how people have racial bias in the country, you could look at that research. That doesn't mean that the teacher is endorsing that research. It means that there's an opportunity to talk about, well, how do we use mathematical concepts to study something like racism and bias and how racism still exists. And we're talking about, one chart maybe in a textbook that could be hundreds of pages long, and that becomes the reason to ban it. And so they're in many cases making a very strong leap from one chart on one page in one textbook that a teacher might teach to suggesting that that means that the whole textbook is some kind of form of quote unquote indoctrination. And that's the level of rhetoric that they use a lot. They say, these books are indoctrination. The vast majority of these books, they had 54 math textbooks in that state that were at first prohibited, and now they've allowed many of them to go through. And they claim that some changes were made to what's in the text. A lot of that hasn't been transparent. It hasn't been made, especially public. So it's hard to assess what's really going on, what changes are really being made. And a lot of it does appear like an almost like, making a big show of this, right? So that Ron DeSantis, the governor in Florida, can appear to be being really tough on this issue. But it's not so clear that there's actually such a major, epidemic or crisis of quote unquote indoctrination that they want there to be. At least they haven't shown that in the examples they've given so far with math.
Yeah, we know Ron DeSantis goes after everything he calls woke. So whether it's the woke Disney company when he went after Disney, or woke textbooks, or woke curriculum, he loves that word, and he knows it's a buzzword that triggers the most extreme people in the Republican base that he's talking to. But are you seeing, in this study, did you find that most of these bills and most of these bans focus on books and topics related to the LGBT community and African American related topics, race, racism, structural racism? Are those the topics that are targeted more, say, than maybe topics around Native Americans or even the Holocaust?
So we're talking about what started as two different phenomena that are increasingly merging. One were bills at the state level, including prohibitions on what can be taught or specific curricular materials saying that they can't be used, like the 1619 Project. And, again, often they say that it's anything that has quote unquote critical race theory, with very little clarity around what they even mean by that. And the term being so elastic that you can use it to tar just about anything having to do with racism or diversity. So suddenly a class on slavery or the civil rights movement can be claimed to be quote unquote critical race theory just because it has race in it in some way. And that's, highly concerning. The other movement that we've seen is a grassroots movement. It started with parents, largely at first in Texas and then spreading to Florida and some other states, Utah, Virginia, who have been mobilized to scour school libraries for book materials that they object to, books that contain sex, books that contain LGBTQ characters, books that have protagonists of color, or books that deal with racism either historically or contemporarily. And what they are doing increasingly is sweeping up more and more books into these lists that have proliferated online among different groups in different parts of the country with new demands that school boards ban those books. And now what we're seeing is some of that effort to basically claim that there is quote unquote pornography in school libraries or obscene materials. And again, none of the books that are in school libraries chosen by school librarians would meet the legal definition of these terms, but nonetheless, we have websites and lists proliferating online which claim that there are these books in lots of schools. And I was looking at one of these websites yesterday in Utah. It says, there's pornography in these schools, and that includes The Perks of Being a Wallflower or The Handmaid's Tale. And so you get a sense here of how the concept and definition of these terms is being stretched, but nonetheless, it's being used to satisfy a political agenda where now Republican legislators in Utah are pointing to that website and saying, look, this is why we need new legislation, which will give new powers to school boards and to themselves to Republican state legislators to ban some specific books or create new mechanisms for removing books that they object to or that their constituents and supporters object to. And so all of this has gone from, I think, small incremental efforts at forms of censorship, but they're turning into like one big snowball, and it is spreading around the country fast.
What about, Jonathan, books that some on the left, like I've read an article that said some liberals have targeted books like Of Mice and Men and To Kill a Mockingbird, and that those books are being challenged by the left because of the content around race and derogatory language and racial slurs. Do you think those books, that there are some books that should be banned, or does your organization take the position that there should be, just a universally no ban on any books?
I am working at a free expression organization that is committed to open access to literature. And I believe that there are important things for people to learn from reading books, that there should not be books that are banned in libraries. In fact, in most libraries in the country right now, this minute, you wouldn't find, for example, Mein Kampf. Let's just take that example of a horribly racist, anti-Semitic book. That book is not banned. If somebody wants to read it, if they want to study it historically, they can.
Well,
and what's happening?
What about classrooms? Do you think there should be some books that are banned in certain classrooms, say, K through third grade, or elementary school? Do you think, from a free expression standpoint, that there should be no bans at any grade on any topic?
Well, I don't think bans are actually very useful or the necessary tool here. I think that we have systems in place for educators to think about what is the utility of certain books in schools, in classrooms, in school libraries. And for the most part, we have been able to find a way to allow books that people want to read and want to have access to in schools and in school libraries where students are. Now, there have been some challenges, as you mentioned, parents or other activists who push to remove Huckleberry Finn or Of Mice and Men. And sometimes they even target, for example, Toni Morrison or Maya Angelou's I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. So by no means are those books only ever targeted because it's a conservative movement against them. In some cases, as you mentioned, there are people who don't like the fact that they bring to light historical racism or racial slurs. But going as far as banning those books, that's where we have to recognize that banning is a tool of authoritarian countries. It is not something that we should be embracing in the United States, no matter what kind of rationale is put behind it. Yeah.
So, okay, your Huckleberry Finn, you gave that example. Do you think that there should be any prohibition on how those books are presented to students in classrooms? So if I'm sitting in I don't know what grade you read Huckleberry Finn in, but maybe you read in the 7th or 8th grade. And we know there have been teachers who've been disciplined for reading the text of the book and then reading out loud either the N-word or other racial slurs that may be contained in the book. So what's your position on that?
I think that this is the question that we should all be turning to, which is one of education. How are teachers prepared to handle those moments? How are they being instructed in how to teach those materials effectively? How are they being sensitive to the ways in which a book that has any kind of slurs, you mentioned the N-word, how are they teaching that in a way that is sensitive to the real dynamics of those students' lives? There have been stories where, for example, students in a majority white school read and learn about a book like that, and then the students are calling their Black peers the N-word, and they say, well, I read it in a book. That's really alarming, and we need some way to educate people and to talk about these issues. But again, I don't think the answer is through prohibitions. I think the answer is through education. And what I really want to stress is that while we have seen those kinds of challenges in recent years, overwhelmingly, in the past 10 months, that is not the dynamic that is emerging in school districts. I do not know of any cases in the past 9-10 months of those books being targeted from groups that I would say are on the progressive or on the left. That is the momentum right now is so squarely coming from this conservative movement. But yes, in theory, we could certainly see this. We have seen it. We could see it again. And I think it's important that we're able to stand up for the principles here against book banning in schools and for young people, so that we do not risk kind of creating a precedent whereby we are saying that anybody who doesn't like a book can remove access to it for everybody else. And
what efforts, what are you guys doing at your organization to fight these 54 bills that have been introduced over 24 different states? Give us one or two of the top line things that are being done to fight these Republican and conservative lawmakers and groups that are pushing these bans.
Well, I think the biggest challenge right now is public awareness, and that a lot of these bills are being pushed without enough sufficient, awareness of the public. There are so many difficult issues right now in the public sphere that, demand citizens' attention. And this is, another one of them. And so you're always trying to figure out, how do you get people to pause and see what's going on, and how do you bring it to light? So public education and awareness raising has been a key focus of our efforts, just even pointing out how many of the bills there are circulating, how many book bans that have taken place in the past year, and really trying to make that a key focus. And then the next phase for us is going to be about helping to mobilize people, to encourage people to get active in their communities, to follow school board elections, to give voice at state legislatures, to support in particular the teachers and librarians, and in some cases professors, who are right now bearing the brunt of some of these bills and feeling in many cases kind of isolated, alone, and not with the support of their communities. And that is what is going to ultimately undermine the great public education that has developed in parts of the country, that needs, of course, to be reformed and to be strengthened, but not be ruined altogether.
Well, thank you so much, Jonathan, for the work that your PIN America is doing around raising awareness. As you said, so much of this is people don't even know these bills are being advanced to their state legislatures. They're not educated on what's happening. And it is a small minority that we often see showing up at these school board meetings, making these demands. And we know that they are not speaking for the majority of parents who have kids in public schools, because across this country, most of the kids in public schools, particularly in big cities like LA, are Black and brown kids. They're not wealthy kids. They're not kids who are parents are, Republican or conservative. So we've got to get the majority parents out who oppose these bans, so that the minority voice is not overtaking and overpowering that of the majority, because that's not democracy. That's not democracy at all. So, but again, thank you so much, Jonathan, for joining me, and thank you for your work.
Thank you.
My next guests are Wade Hudson and Cheryl Hudson. Both of them are accomplished authors of children's books that focus on Black experiences and Black culture. They've written books together, including a book they co-authored called We Rise, We Resist, We Raise Our Voices. They are also the co-founders of a publishing company called Just Us Books. Good morning, Wade, and good morning, Cheryl. First of all,
good morning.
You guys,
good morning.
Author goals, because I'm an author myself. I'm working on my 5th book, but then I read in your bio, Wade, that you've written 30 books, and Cheryl, you've written 24. And I'm like, okay, I got to get cranking, because I am like far behind you all. So I've got a lot of work to do. So you're giving me a lot of inspiration this morning. So I just want to say congratulations on how prolific you have been
Thank
in
you.
writing books. But what are you all thinking about these bans? Efforts by Republican-led legislators to ban books like The Bluest Eye, a book that I think every Black girl should read. My daughters have read it. I've read it. We read it over and over again. But you write books that focus on the Black experience and Black culture. So what are you thinking in this moment? I'll start with you, Wade.
I sort of look at it from my own experiences. Cheryl and I both grew up during the late 1950s and 60s, and we grew up at a time when there were very few books in the school curriculum, in the libraries, even in bookstores, that addressed the Black experience. So this whole notion of banned books resonate with us, because that wasn't the term that was used at that time, but there were no books about the people I knew, or about the experiences of my ancestors. And to not have those books to read had an enormous impact on self-esteem and understanding connection to the past and all of that. So it resonates with us now, because we sort of see this effort more in a political from a political lens, and that there is a significant number of people who want to take us back to those days when who we are was defined by them. What we read was often defined by them. And that's the way I'm looking at it. To me, it's very simple and direct. Who are we to be as a people? That is the question that's sort of hovering over all of us. Are we going to be an inclusive nation who recognizes diversity and recognizes that we all are part of the human experience? Or are we going to go back to a time when a handful of folks determined who we are and established the narrative? So I think really the push now is to refocus the narrative to a bygone era. And I think that's what this whole book banning is about. There may be other ways of looking at it, but I'm looking at it through my experiences and what I have endured as a Black person growing up in America. And we've seen some progress. And so that progress threatens some people. So they want to, take that progress away, and not only just take the progress away, but take us back. That's why we see all these bills and, the push to end the right for abortion and all those things. It's a cultural war that we are engaged in, and that's the way I see it in a larger sense.
And Cheryl, you guys particularly focus on kids. A lot of books that you've written are written for children. How important is it that children see themselves represented in books and that they have available books like The Bluest Eye and others that really grapple with what it means to be a Black kid growing up in America?
It's absolutely crucial. As parents, we recognize that early on with our children, just in terms of looking for materials that would speak to our children in textbooks, from the alphabet to history books to just picture books about daily life. So the impact is great, because before even the 1960s, there were very few, if any, Black children, people of color in textbooks. And textbooks were the books where children saw themselves. So if you're looking at a first grade reader in the blue group and you just see Spot run, here's my mom, here's my dad, here's the picket fence, and here's the house, and you don't see any Black children, there are no Black children in the neighborhood, there's nobody but white. As a matter of fact, one of the founders, one of the presidents of the International Reading Association, wrote an article that really jump-started a lot of this movement, the all-white world of children's books, and how a lack of seeing yourself in a book reflects not only on a Black child, but on white children too, because it indicates to them that they are the rulers of the world. They're the only ones who are controlling things. So it's crucial that children see themselves in books because they exist. And if you are erased, you don't feel like you matter. And I think erasure is a part, as Wade said, not only in textbooks, but in terms of voting rights and just control of your bodies as women. It is a cultural thing, and books should not be banned. They may be challenged for their appropriateness by parents, but no one group of parents should be able to dictate what every parent wants for their child. You may want to not have a book for your particular child, but you should not be dictating what my child and millions of other children read or have access to.
Do you know, Cheryl, how much progress has been made? Because I'm thinking about textbooks, and you're right. The textbooks that I had, both in elementary school, high school, maybe even college, how much progress has been made in diversity in terms of those textbooks? Are there more people of color in those, particularly elementary school books? Has there been a lot
Yeah,
of
yeah.
effort?
There's more. There's a lot that was done in the early '70s. For example, when I first started, I worked with textbooks, and one of the first things that I had to do as an art editor trainee at a major textbook company was to color in the skins or the skin tones of all of the white kids in the books, because all of them were white. And so there had to be 5% of this, or you counted kids with bows on their head to avoid sexism, or you counted kids that had glasses. So there were guidelines set up by a lot of textbook companies to be more inclusive in their library books. But at the same time, the books in textbooks are something to be that are really important. Trade books as well, which is a whole different category in library books. But in states like Texas and Florida and in some other states, there were adoption systems even at that time in the early '70s, and they still exist. California has an adoption system where the state will approve of 3 or 4 textbooks. And if there was something in some of these textbooks that the State Board of Education in Texas did not approve of, publishers responded by taking out those things or having different versions of the textbooks for the South and the North. So you've got a complex situation here.
Yeah, I'm thinking, Wade, that there was, as Cheryl talked about, this movement in the '70s and moving forward to make books, textbooks in particular, more culturally sensitive. And we talked about how we make, curriculum more culturally sensitive. And now it's the opposite. It's let's go back, as you said, to this period where the textbooks reflect what is considered to be the kind of the attitudes and norms of the controlling party. And that controlling party in some of these red states like Texas and Florida are Republicans. So I just wonder, where do we go with this movement? How do we continue to make sure that Black and brown kids and other minority groups will have access to books that represent their norms, their traditions, and their cultures?
Yeah, I think in addition to the progress that has been made in textbooks, there's been a lot of progress in getting diverse books into the marketplace, into libraries, and schools as well. And book creators, particularly books created by people of color, have been pushing the envelope for decades to get their books out into the marketplace. And I think we have to remain persistent. We have to keep pushing. We have to encourage and inspire people in the community to step up and to voice their opposition to what's happening. And that is occurring. There are a number of local groups around the country that have been organized to push back against book banning. Many of them have been organized by parents, Black parents. There have even been efforts by students themselves to push back. And what I have seen over the last few months or so is that books that have been banned, the sales of those books have increased. So I think that we have to continue what Jonathan was saying, making people aware of what's happening, and also offering to them steps that they can take to push back against what's happening. Going to the local school board when an issue of banning is being addressed and voicing their opinion, bringing your neighbors with you, your friends, your family. And so it has to be an all-out kind of approach to address this and to stop it, because if we don't, it will, 10 years from now, many of the books that we're reading now won't be available, because it's about banning, but it's also about challenging books. And when books are challenged, oftentimes what happens is schools and librarians get a little worried about that, and they may not offer a book to a student. It may be still in the library, but they may not present that book as an option for kids to read. So we really have to have an all-out assault. But I think people are fighting back against it. And we just don't get enough publicity to spotlight how people are fighting back. You can see articles here and there, but there is an effort to fight back.
Yeah, and Jonathan talked about that, Cheryl, this loud minority voice that seems to occupy the public space, that seems to get all of the attention and gives the impression that there is much wider support for the ban of these books than what there actually is. How do we get parents, and like I said, in public schools, I live in Los Angeles, I'm thinking there are very few white kids in public schools in most of Los Angeles. The schools are predominantly Latinx, African American, Asian, minority students. How do we get those parents to become the loud majority that they are? They are the majority. How do we get their voices elevated in a way that they drown out this minority of parents who right now seem to be controlling the narrative?
Well, you know, what you're saying is so true. You get parents involved by really encouraging them to read the books that their children are engaged with in classrooms, to be involved in the schools, to be involved in their children's lives. At Just Us Books, this is a company that we founded, and the basis of our company is really that there were so few books available for our children, and we weren't being acknowledged as authors by the major publishing companies, that we started our own press. And freedom of the press is really guaranteed, someone said, to those who own one. So it may be a small effort, but self-publishing, independent publishing by BIPOC citizens is a step, but we just have to let more and more people know about it. There are toolkits that are available through the American Library Association, petitions that we have signed as groups of children's book authors to encourage congressmen to make this a part of their support system, because censorship is relevant and so germane to the education of all of our youngsters. We want our youngsters to have access to information, to facts, so that you can make critical decisions, not critical race decisions, but so that children will have critical thinking. That's what education is about. So we've got to get to the core of that and just encourage parents to be more involved in their kids' educations through the PTA, through the school board. Because again, if a small minority gets these bills passed in their state and very much at the local level, that this is true as well as at the national level.
Yeah, and I think, could I just add a point to what Cheryl is saying? I think it also is about providing examples to people what to do and how what you do can work. I think that can go a long ways to empowering people. I think what happens for a lot of folks don't feel that they can make a difference. And so they don't take any steps. I mean, it was similar to the civil rights movement. Early on, there were a handful, a small group of people who were actually leading the movement. And as it grew, more and more people became involved. So I think it's a similar kind of thing now, that the more people who are involved in speaking out, the more people around the country find out about those people and what they are doing, how successful they've been in pushing back, that they can become motivated and inspired to step up too. So I think getting the word out is just so key. I think Jonathan mentioned that a couple of times, just getting the word out so more people are aware of what's going on and also understand that they can play a role in helping to stop this.
Yeah, that's so true.
Thanks to you, Cheryl and Wade, for the great work you all are doing for, as you said, starting your own publishing company and making sure that books that represent the Black culture and Black experience are available. And we know that getting those books into the hands of kids early as possible is so important to their growth, their development, their sense of self, their sense of self-confidence, all very important. So again, thank you for the great work. And all right, what's next? You guys have hit the 30 book mark. Wade, what are you looking for? 50, 100 books? What's your goal?
Well, actually, I have 3 new books that are coming out actually next year, 2 picture books and a novel. that will be coming out. And I think, Cheryl, you have
I have a picture book that's coming out, and again, it's about music, and and I think the thing is that the books that we do are about kids who are Black, who have experiences like everyday experiences, like Jamal going to school, or a grandma sitting on the front porch and reading a story, or places that kids love to go. They're not only about what would be termed social justice or heavy topics.
Black kids doing everyday
Black everyday or
Exactly.
everyday information.
Where can we find your books? I know we have the we rise, we resist, we raise our voices. That's just one of many of the 50 plus books that you guys have written. But where can people find your books? So they.
But we have, our company, Just Us Books, was launched in 1988, and we are now preparing to embark on our 33rd year of publishing. But in addition to publishing books ourselves, we published a lot of authors and illustrators. We've also done collaborative work with major publishers. So We Rise, We Resist, We Raise Our Voices was published by Crown Books. And some of the other books that we have done most recently were also published by Crown. But people can find our books at www.justusbooks.com. www.justusbooks.com.
Fantastic. Well, we'll definitely make sure we get that website out so people can go and find your books. And I'm happy to hear that you're doing collaborations with major publishers as well as doing books under your own imprint. Again, thank you so much, Wade. Thank you, Cheryl, for joining me. All right.
Thank you.
Yes. My next guest is Jenison Lucas. She is the president of the American Association of School Librarians. And we can't have this conversation about banning the books without talking about the role of libraries and librarians. Good morning and welcome, Jenison. You've been listening to this conversation. I saw the statistic that the American Library Association said that it received an unprecedented number of challenges last fall to books. I think over 330 challenges to books. How serious is it for librarians, this rise in bans to books about race and sexuality? What are you all thinking as librarians about these issues?
This is very disconcerting to us as librarians because we see that as the diminishing of voices, and we don't want that. We want to have a much more diverse collection in our libraries because we have a diverse world that we live in, and we want all of those stories to be out there and be told. And it's normally about, I think the American Library Association sees about 300 in a year. And last year there were close to 750 challenges for over 1,500 different books. So it's definitely been a huge uptick. As Jonathan said earlier, it's a snowball, and it's coming faster than some of us know how to keep up with it. I think, but
so I said 330 was just in the fall, but you said for the whole year it was over 700. So when you get a request to ban a book, what's the process that librarians have to go through?
In every school district, it looks a little bit different, but every district should have a selection development policy or a collection development policy, which lists out how we choose what books are going to be in the library. Then we also have what is called a reconsideration policy, so that if somebody does have a complaint about a book, there is a policy and a process to follow to say, hey, I am objecting to this book because of whatever reason. And those usually include saying that you've read the book as a whole, that you have, and that asks for what exactly is it that you're objecting to, and often will also include something about what would you consider a better book on the same topic? Because there might be occasions where we have accidentally gotten the book in the wrong spot in our collections, that maybe this one wasn't quite as appropriate to K3 and would be better in the middle school, for instance.
Who's the final arbiter? So I write a request to ban The Boo Is I, because I think, for whatever reason, I don't like how it discusses and deals with the issue of race. I don't want my little kids to read it. There's this process you set in place, somebody reviews it, and then who gets the final word?
Usually the absolute final word comes from the school board. What we have been seeing happening in the last year and a half or so is that that's where everyone is trying to start, by going to school board meetings, reading salacious passages out of context, then getting all upset and making everybody else upset. The process usually works with talking with the librarian first, because librarians always want to back up the parents. Mm-hmm. We want you to be involved with what your kid does and what your kid reads. And as Cheryl pointed out, we want you to be reading with your kids. That's the ultimate, parent-child time in some ways. And so we acknowledge that a parent has the right to parent and decide for their own child. That's called parental discernment. And then it's usually can be solved that way. I don't want my child reading a book about zombies because it gives him nightmares. Okay, we'll help you not let him check out any more books about zombies. Mm-hmm. When that parent decides that they don't want it available for anybody is where it crosses the line from parental discernment into censorship. And that's when our process kicks in. Usually that next step is to go to either a building or district level committee. That is usually determined by how large the district is. And then if the committee makes a decision on that, and then if the person complaining about the book does not like the decision of the committee, they can appeal it to the school board or to whatever is the next step up in their district.
Okay. And I know we've seen some efforts in some states to even criminalize, make criminal complaints available to be filed against librarians. Have you seen that, or have you had anyone in your association that's actually had a criminal complaint filed against them because they didn't remove a book?
We have not seen a specific criminal charge yet, at least not that I am aware of. But we have seen the possible legislation coming up. It is absolutely not right to criminalize somebody doing the job that they are trained and hired for. And it's scary and it's disconcerting because oftentimes a school librarian is the only person in their building that does the job that they do. And so feeling like all of that pressure is on our shoulders can be quite difficult. And I am also in addition to being president of AASL, I'm also a practicing school librarian. And I'm the certified librarian for 7 schools. So I have all of those collections under my purview. And so thinking that any of the parents in my district could have recourse to decide that I'm a criminal because I'm choosing books doesn't seem quite right. I'm the only one that has the training and the qualifications that I do.
Are you seeing in your experience as president of this association or the libraries that you oversee yourself that the books that are being targeted are books that deal with race and the LGBTQ issues? Yes. Right now, my district is actually today having a meeting about 2 books. Both of them have to do with race, and one of them, the complaints have a lot to do with sex and things like that in the book. So we're definitely seeing that. And in the past, I have seen some LGBTQ things come through, and the complainants in my area are an organized group. They have publicly announced that they have about 100 more books on their list. So we are, Example, can you tell me what the name of the book is? Are you able to say the names of these 2 books? The ones that we are talking about tonight are The Color Purple by Alice Walker and How to Be an Anti-Racist by Ibram Kendi. And what's wrong with The Color Purple? I love wonderful book, great movie. Whoopi Goldberg. What's wrong with The Color Purple? The complainant is objecting to the amount of sex and vulgar terminology in the books, and that the main character is raped right on the first page, and claiming that that's not appropriate at our high school. For a high school library? Yes, it's a high school library. Wow, okay. And How to Be an Anti-Racist, what's their complaint about that? The complaints about that are that it contains false information
and that it goes against the teachings of Dr. Martin Luther King.
And I assume these people who are making these claims are not historians. They are not trained in literature in any way. I mean, because to say that a book goes against the teachings of Dr. Martin Luther King would mean you'd have to be pretty much an expert on all the teachings of Martin Luther King, which I don't think most lay people are.
I feel not qualified to make that judgment, and I'm a certified librarian with training on how to determine what kind of books should be in a library.
Right, yeah, and I got a bunch of degrees over here, and I couldn't make that determination. So, okay, we get the point. So some of this is just knee-jerk reaction, talking points, things that are disseminated online. Probably, information goes out. Here's a list. Go through this list, and here are your talking points as to why you don't like this book. But if you really start to dig deep in terms of why these people don't like these books, they probably don't have logical answers. Well, thank you so much for the work that you're doing. Keep fighting the good fight. Hopefully this conversation will create opportunities for more conversations like this, because as we've been saying throughout the show today, this is really just a small minority of people. Unfortunately, they happen to be pretty organized in some states, and they're able to lift their voices in ways to drown out the majority voices that would say, yeah, I want my high school age kids to know about rape, because that's a real thing that happens to people in high school. So the concept that you can't have a book about that involves a rape is really kind of just beyond me. So, but thank you so much for joining us, Jenison, and thanks for the work that you're doing. All right,
Thank you for having me.
My next guest is Adam Tritt. He is an author, he's a poet and teacher, and he's doing something really remarkable. He is raising money to buy the books that these organized groups and parents are banning, and then he's distributing them to students. He also has multiple books that he's written. His latest book is Tellstones. Good morning and welcome, Adam.
Good morning. I appreciate being here.
Congratulations to you for having the courage to take matters into your own hand, not sit on the sideline and whine and complain, but come up with a solution. And I know you've raised now over $13,000. I said 10, but actually it's up to 13. Tell us some of the titles that you bought back.
Well, many of the titles we brought back are some of the ones that you've been mentioning. The Bluest Eye, books by Toni Morrison, books by Alice Walker, Vonnegut, Cat's Cradle, Slaughterhouse-Five is a big one that was by order, just removed from my own classroom. Long Boy. We have many books for our LGBTQ kids. This book is gay. All Boys Aren't Blue.
Yeah, that book, All Boys Aren't Blue. That author, I read something. It was Johnson, right?
Mm-hmm.
Read about how just shocked he was that, and it's a book where I guess there's some anal sex and sexual content, but he's trying to, again, raise awareness about issues that people in the LGBTQ community experience, and just issues that, makes them more aware of what's happening in their surroundings. But you're in Florida. Adam,
yes.
Is there any fear that, you're going to get a knock on the door from the book banning police, one of these law enforcement agencies that DeSantis is deploying?
Well, yes.
Described as the woke teacher that's buying woke books?
Well, yes. This is the state of the Stop Woke law. This is a state where, in this county, the sheriff has said he will not provide support at school board meetings anymore when people are asked to sit down, leave, their time is up, because he believes it is unconstitutional to do so. Yes, while I would not say I'm in fear, there's a real possibility of danger. Yeah, and we'll be distributing books anyway.
Wow.
It won't stop me.
Mm-hmm. How are you getting, two questions, how are you getting this money? How'd you raise $13,000? And then how do you get the books into the hands of the students?
The first one is easier to answer, though I don't believe anyone's more surprised than I am. I simply started a GoFundMe.
Okay.
I wanted to raise $1,000 to get a smattering of books. There's 41 books on this Moms Against Liberty list. and I wanted to get money to raise for a few of them. Slaughterhouse-Five, This Book is Gay, All Boys Aren't Blue, The Bluest Eye, and a few others. Next thing I know, we raised that money. I purchased some books. I don't know what happened next, because through social media, within one day, it went from 1,400 to 14,000, which is just about where it's at right now. As far as getting the books out, there are many businesses here that have a great deal of interest in having an intelligent, literate electorate. And so we have businesses that said, please come here, set up a table, give out the books. Please make this a drop-off site. Ben & Jerry's, florist shops, one of our wonderful Black-owned bakeries in Cocoa Village. Please come here, give out books.
How do the kids know to go to Ben & Jerry's or go to the floral shop or to go to the bakery?
We're working on that. It can't go through the schools, obviously. So it is going through social media, through Twitter, through a site called Safe Schools, Families for Safe Schools, on Facebook. Stores are putting up signs. It's largely word of mouth and social media.
And are you finding that when young people, students find out that can go to their local ice cream shop and pick up a book, that they are taking advantage of it?
They are very interested in this. And my own students before school was up were very upset about the concept of not being able to read Slaughterhouse-Five, not being able to read Toni Morrison.
So these books were actually banned. Toni Morrison was taken out of your classroom?
Slaughterhouse-Five was taken out of my classroom. I don't have the others in my classroom, but we were definitely told we couldn't use them.
And what grade are you teaching, Adam?
I teach 11th grade AP English and Honors English. And what is important?
11th graders cannot read Toni Morrison in AP English?
Well, it's actually worse than that, if I may, for two reasons. One, AP English, as well as Honors, is an elective course. You choose to be in that course. To choose to go into a course and then tell other people what they can and cannot do, that is utterly wrong. The second problem with that is AP English is technically a college course. It is a college level course. So we have mothers telling all the kids what they cannot do in a Com 1 course, a college course. They could not do that in a college setting. But because Com 1 is taught in high school, they feel they can get away with that.
Yeah, and are you finding, like I said, I've read these articles that these lists of books are just circulating, and these conservative groups are using social media to send out lists. So almost like a toolkit. Like, each parent go on Facebook, get the list, here are the canned reasons why you don't want the book. Many of the parents have not read the books. Many of them have no background in literature or history or anything that would make them authorities on, these books as to why they should be banned. Yeah. Is that what's happening in your community as well?
Oh, that's exactly what's happening. Moms for Liberty here prizes 4 women, 4, each of whom has told me they have only read one of these books each. That is, to be fair, to be more clear, 41 books, each of them has read 10. They then tell the others it needs to be banned. Slaughterhouse-Five, as an example, it's banned because it has a picture, a crudely drawn picture of breasts, and it satirizes Christianity.
Okay.
Those are two of the reasons.
Trust you or other teachers in the school to be able to give context to these books, because when you're teaching, and I remember I was in an AP English class, and I remember you're not just given a book and say go off and read it. There's discussion and there's interaction with the professor or the teacher. And the teacher does give context to these books. They don't trust the teachers in Florida to be able to do that?
No, they do not, because right now teachers are not teachers. Teachers are, and I quote, groomer teachers, which I have been called myself, a groomer and a pedophile for doing this. You either agree with them or you are a groomer. There is no middle space at all with these people.
Wow, that's disturbing. I'm sure it makes it very difficult for someone like you who, I mean, if you teach AP English,
Yes.
obviously you have a love for literature. What are the top 3 to 5 books that you think should not be banned that have been on these lists?
Well, I could maybe not the top 3. I could give you 5 or 6 that should not be banned. Starting with Slaughterhouse-Five. This book is gay, should not be banned. Many of my students need these books. The Mostly True Diary of a Part-Time Indian by Sherman Alexie should not be banned. Many areas still ban Fahrenheit 451. With the irony in that is just, and Beloved.
Such a great book. Yeah, Beloved shows up on a lot of these lists.
Mm-hmm.
What's the reason given in your district as to why Beloved should be banned?
Beloved should be banned because, and I'd hate for that to be taken out of context and used as a quote, they believe Beloved should be banned because it makes white people uncomfortable. You see, even our textbooks, as one of your earlier guests discussed, even our textbooks have been sanitized. We can use Dr. Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech. I can no longer teach Letters from Birmingham Jail. So
they cherry pick what they like from Dr. King, and I Have a Dream is about integration and races coming together, so that's okay. But the letter from the Birmingham jail,
because it discusses how one of the major impediments isn't to equality isn't the KKK, it's the moderate white.
Whites, yeah.
And that's going to make some people uncomfortable. So my fear for my black students, my white students, all of my students is we're not going to get an idea what other families are like, what other lives are like. Not only will students not recognize themselves in the literature, but if we don't read literature about each other, we'll never realize how alike we really are.
Yeah, and I worry, Adam, that these recent school shootings and these recent mass shootings and these young 18-year-old men,
yes,
how much exposure have they had? Particularly the Buffalo shooter who became indoctrinated and is bought into this great replacement theory. Was he ever exposed to that letter from a Birmingham jail? Has he ever had exposure to the kind of literature that these groups want to ban? And if him or someone like him had that exposure, would that help them better understand that there is not some boogeyman black person or immigrant coming to replace him or his family, whomever he fears is being replaced?
It would. I believe it would help, but it's not happening. It's not happening in part because teachers are afraid to lose their jobs, they're afraid to lose their positions. They're afraid to have people picketing outside their homes.
And I know it's gotten so bad. I've read about teachers getting death threats and just their families being threatened.
Yeah.
But we know it can get very vicious. Wow. How do we support you? I know you have this GoFundMe that went viral and went from 1,400 to 14,000. We want to make it double, get it to 28,000. How do we
I will tell you, as by way of a joke, maybe not a joke, my little computer just died. I need to buy a new one. I need a Chromebook. What I really need is for people to donate money for books.
Yeah.
Because what we can do with this extra money is we can get books to people who don't have transportation. Because I know a lot of people who cannot afford books also do not have transportation. Their parents work 2-3 jobs, crazy hours. There's no bus system here. We want to get books to them as well. We want to buy books that are not available used. Now, the 1619 project has not been banned, the book, but all the content has. The Stop Woke law means we cannot teach the content. I cannot get it used. I want those copies available for our students. I want them available for our parents.
The Stop Woke law prevents you from talking about the topics in the 1619 book, but you can actually bring the book into class and they can read the book?
No, neither. What I'm saying is, while the book itself has not been banned by law, it de facto it has been.
Because of the content, okay.
Because of the content. I would like that to be available. This extra money allows us to purchase these books new that we cannot purchase used. And we have local partners who are giving us ridiculous discounts on books to be able to carry out this mission.
How do we find the GoFundMe?
I can post a link, which I just did.
And we will share this GoFundMe that helps you, as you said, buy those books, new books that aren't available used, and getting into the hands of the kids and the individuals that need them the most. Thank you so much, Adam, for the work that you're doing. Thank you for the courage to stand up against this, loud minority, to think that there's a group out there, for people who are making decisions and having that kind of power and influence over our educational system is just mind-boggling. But that is the reality. And many of these groups, they're not thousands and thousands of moms. And I keep saying that over and over again. Imagine if all the parents who agree that these topics should be taught or these books should be taught showed up at that school board meeting, and you have the little 4 people, who are controlling everything. So we've got to make sure that people who are posing this mind control, because that's what it is ultimately, is controlling the mind. So they're calling you a groomer. Oh my God, the hypocrisy in that these people are trying to groom and indoctrinate and control the minds of our students and create this false narrative about who we are as a country, which is very dangerous. So thank you for fighting back against that and finding a creative way to do so. I mean, very creative way to do so.
We're causing good trouble.
Yes.
We have to.
John Lewis would love it. Good luck to you, Adam.
Thank you, ma'am.
That good fight, because it's needed. We need boots on the ground, parents and teachers like you who are willing to stand up and fight back. So again, congratulations on your success. I want to thank all of my guests this morning. What a fascinating topic. Some of the books that I love. I'm a history and English lover. My top subjects in school. My kids, I read hundreds and hundreds of books. Both of my kids are voracious readers. They read everything. We would stand in line for 12 hours to buy the Harry Potter series, and literally my daughter, 3rd and 4th grade, was reading 900-page Harry Potter, 1,200 pages of that book. So books are it's an entree into the worlds that oftentimes are unavailable, countries and people and customs and traditions that you may never come into contact with in your reality, but those books can take you there. And that's so important. They teach you how to dream. They teach you so much about other cultures and customs and traditions that you may not have access to or exposure to. And how ridiculous is it that states won't ban assault weapons in classrooms, but readily ban books, that they want to arm, some of these same states want to arm teachers with dangerous firearms, but won't trust teachers to be able to teach these books about sex and racism and teach them in a way that gives context so nobody feels bad about themselves, but that students have an understanding about the reality of this country. They want to hide, these states want to hide the truth about race and racism and deny students the opportunity to learn about sexuality and what it means to be gay in this country. But yet they're willing to expose these same kids to the constant danger of mass shootings. The hypocrisy, the illogical nature of these arguments are just frustrating and mind-boggling. But again, I'll just say it over and over again. This is a small minority. And when we, the majority, stand up, resist, and raise our voices, as Cheryl and Wade, show us how to do with their book, we can defeat this small minority. And we, the people, can restore a democratic process to our schools and our libraries so that our kids can have access to the literature and the books that are going to teach them to be critical thinkers, open their minds, and help them understand this world around them, because it's a crazy mixed up world and our kids need as much love and support as possible. And that means they need access to books. My words to live by. A book is a dream that you hold in your hands. Let's give our kids an opportunity to hold that dream in their hands. Be safe out there and remember, we're all in this together.